Good day. Welcome to another session of Folk Tutorials. And today we begin our series on cost and management accounting. And we want to start by just introducing cost and management accounting to us. So we are going to look at what is management accounting, cost accounting all about. And then we are going to look at the concept of cost and some ways that we can classify cost. So basically that is what this video is aiming to achieve. We are going to look at cost and cost classifications. Alright. So we straight away look at management accounting as a concept. So we are looking at introduction to cost and management accounting. Right, so we are introducing cost and management accounting. What is management accounting? What is cost? What is cost accounting? What is costing? These terms are sometimes used interchangeably, but then we just have to try and understand them because they are interrelated. First of all, we have to understand cost, and then costing, and then cost accounting, and then management accounting. Now, what is cost? First of all, what is cost? Cost can be defined as an expenditure that is incurred in relation to a particular product, process, or service, or a job. This is the amount of expenditure that is incurred in ascertaining or manufacturing a product, rendering a service, or embarking on a particular process in the organization. It's what we refer to as cost. Now, so we look at cost as an expenditure incurred in producing a product or rendering a service. That is cost. And then cost can be actual or notional. Let us take note of that. That we have actual cost and we have notional cost. And so this amount of expenditure that we call cost can be actual or it can be notional. Actual cost means that is what you have seen. Actual cost has some kind of physical properties with the things that they relate to. And so when you buy the material, the physical material that you see, and then you pay the labor that worked on the materials, and then the direct expenses, including maybe the hire of a special plant or machinery, when you go by them like that, you see that those ones you pay, and the things that you are paying for are visible. And so you can see. And so those kind of costs are what we call the actual cost of the activity. Now when we come to notional costs are usually not costs that are seen. They are costs that are implied. But then most of the time, cost accountants tend to ignore notional costs, most of us. And that is why it is important that we understand what notional cost means. Let us take an example. That imagine someone who cooks food and sells by the wayside. So the person buys, let's assume you are selling cooked rice on the wayside for customers. You buy the rice, it's your material, you put it on fire, others may help you, you pay them, that will be your cost of labor. And then if you hire a special machine to make your work easier, that may be a direct expense, and you incur all kind of expenses, and then you make the rice ready for the market. You take the rice to the market to sell. Now, on your way to the market, there are a lot of risks that you go through. Sometimes, even by the wayside, there is a lot of risk that you are exposed to. It could be that whilst you are selling the rice on the wayside, a vehicle may just run into you and then kill you or do something harmful to you. Now remember that the risk that you are bearing in staying by the risky roadside to sell is also cost to you. But that cost is called notional cost. Usually, cost accountants, some of us do not pay much attention to notional cost because we don't see it. It is not out of pocket cost. Let me say that. We don't pay money out of our pocket to incur those kind of costs. And so when we are doing calculation of cost, we tend to forget notional cost. But any cost that is incurred in a sacrifice, it is like opportunity cost. In a sacrifice to achieve something, it's called notional cost. And once we are talking about cost, we need to include both actual cost and notional cost. Even when you stand by the, in Africa we have a lot of street hawkers, those who go and sell food on their head, they hawk on the street. Now, most of these hawkers, apart from the cost incurred in the products that they are selling on their head, they are walking in the sun up and down like that. Now, if they should fall sick through this walking of the sun, or by means of this sun scorching on them, they will need money to buy medicine or seek health treatment. And this risk that is involved in walking up and down on the sun, the cost that the medicine will bring to them, the extra cost, they did not factor it in calculation of total cost of the service that they are rendering or the product. And that extra cost that you did not factor is so. What all I'm trying to say is that costs must be both actual cost and notional cost. Both of them should be factored when you are looking at the total cost of an activity. You don't just look at the cost that you incurred in the physical things that you paid for, and then you leave out the cost that are associated with the risk of what you are doing. And so we factor in the cost that is up here, notional. We assume that there is cost, there is opportunity cost even in going to sell the product by the wayside. There is cost that incurred in the risk that we are taking, and all those kind of costs must be factored so that when the unexpected happens, at least you have a provision made in your cost for that. And that is how other than that, most organizations will achieve a loss, actually attain a loss, and then they may think that they are attaining profit because they did not factor in the other costs that came up as a result of what they were doing, which they should have estimated from the beginning. Now, cost accounting deals with a lot of estimations, and that is what we are driving at. And so cost can be either actual or notional. And so when you are defining cost should be defined as the amount of expenditure that is incurred, whether it's actual or notional, in an activity or a process. Okay, and so that is what we are looking at. Now, cost gave birth to costing. And so how do we ascertain cost? Now, we want to ascertain cost. Now, the techniques and the processes that we go through in order to ascertain cost is what we call costing. And so if you want to define costing, okay, costing was giving birth out from cost. And so costing is just like a present continuous of cost. And so once we know cost, then costing will be the ascertainment of cost. The techniques that we use, the processes that we go through, the methods that you use to ascertain cost is what we call costing. So costing is basically the techniques and processes of ascertaining cost, or cost ascertainment. It's called costing. Okay, and then we also have to understand the meaning of cost accounting. Now, costing is different from cost accounting. Now, costing is just about cost ascertainment. Now, cost accounting has to do with recording of cost data, because now it is accounting, and we know that accounting has to do with recording of transactions, analyzing them, and then communicating them for decision making. And so cost accounting has to do with recording of cost data and analyzing them so that we communicate to management for decision making. That is what cost accounting is all about. Okay, and then it is synonymous sometimes with what we call management accounting. So we try and draw that thin line between cost accounting and management accounting. Now, management accounting is cost accounting. That has been provided to management for management decision making. Okay, so the purpose of cost accounting is to provide cost data for decision making by management. And so management accounting has to really do with the provision of financial and cost data purposely for management decision making. Now, we have so many users of accounting information, but then financial accounting data is for both external and internal users. But management accounting is the provision of financial data for internal use, basically for management. And so when information is provided for management so that it will aid them to take their decisions concerning planning and controlling of the organization, then we call that process as management accounting. So it is actually cost accounting, that is provision of information for management. And when cost accounting records the transactions and analyzes them, then they forward the information to management for decision making. And so the process of accounting for decision making by management, or the process of accounting for management decision making, is what we call management accounting. And so these are how they graduate from the concept of cost to costing to cost accounting, to a thin line between cost accounting and management accounting. Because with cost accounting, we don't really talk too much about management decision making. But with management accounting, we talk about management decision making. However, it is cost accounting that has given birth to management accounting. The only difference is that with the management accounting, management decision making is involved. With cost accounting, we just analyze the data and then that is it. And so once we provide the information from cost accounting to management, then we say we have zoomed into management accounting. Okay, so we are going to look at cost classification. Cost classification. How do we classify cost? How do we classify cost? Now, cost can be classified in many ways, okay? Now, the common ways that we can classify cost is what I'm going to talk about. Cost classification. Now, what is cost classification? Cost classification is the grouping of costs according to common characteristics. Cost classification refers to the grouping of costs according to common characteristics. And so when you realize that some costs have certain characteristics that are similar, then we group them in a particular class, and then we try to explain them from that class. And so there are so many ways that we can classify cost. And the first one is that we can classify cost according to nature. We can classify cost according to nature. And then we can also classify cost according to behavior. Now, to classify cost according to nature is to look at the natural elements that is in the cost. And from the cost classification according to nature, we have material cost, labor cost, and then we have expenses. That is when we are classifying cost according to nature. We can classify cost also according to behavior. To classify cost according to behavior is to look at cost as either fixed cost, variable cost, or mixed cost. Then we are looking at cost according to behavior. And then we can also classify cost according to function, the functions that they perform. And by doing so, we are looking at production cost, administrative cost, selling cost, distribution cost. Then we are looking at the classification of cost according to function, the functions that they perform in the organization. All right. And then we can also classify cost according to control. We can classify cost according to control. And here we are looking at controllable cost and non-controllable cost. Then we are classifying cost according to control. And then maybe I'll say finally, not the least, we can classify cost according to traceability. Traceability, when we can trace cost to cost centers or cost units. And when we are classifying cost according to traceability, we will look at cost as either direct cost or indirect cost. And so the concept of cost is such that we can look at cost from so many angles, and then we can classify cost from under so many headings. And so let us quickly go through these and then try and explain them. Of course, cost behavior will be dealt with in our next video as a full topic on its own. And so I may want to skip the behavior of cost, but then I'll quickly talk about the nature, function, control, and traceability. Okay, and so that is what cost classification is all about. All right, so when we want to classify cost according to nature, we look at material cost, labor cost, and then expenses. Now, first of all, what is cost classification according to nature? Cost classification according to nature is the process of grouping cost according to the natural elements that are in the cost. And so when we talk about material cost, what is material cost? First of all, I want you to understand that there is a difference between material and material cost. When you are asked to define materials, don't define material cost. And when you are asked to define material cost, don't define materials. It depends on how you talk about it. Materials refer to the physical substances that are used in the production of goods and services. The physical substances. But then material cost refers to the cost incurred on those physical substances that are used in the production of goods and services. And so when you are asked to define material cost, it is the cost of the physical substances that are used in production of goods and services. And then when we talk about labor cost has to do with the cost that is incurred on the human efforts that are contributed towards production of goods and services. Labor itself refers to the human efforts that are used in goods and services, producing goods and services. But then, labor cost is the cost incurred on the human efforts that are contributed towards production of goods and services. And then when we come to expenses, in costing, we usually say that the expenses are any other cost apart from material and labor. So when we are looking at cost according to nature, any other cost apart from material and labor, we call it expenses. And so over here we can talk about traceability as well, because traceability of course goes everywhere. We can look at, especially under nature, we can look at direct material and then indirect material costs. We can look at direct labor costs and indirect labor costs. And then we can look at direct expenses and indirect expenses. These are just introductions. As a matter of fact, we will look at each of these as a full topic on its own as we move forward. And so let us not worry too much about that. So when we talk about cost classification according to nature, basically we are looking at material, labor, and expenses cost. Okay. And then we can also look at cost classification according to behavior. Let me just chip in the behavior, even though I'm going to talk about it in our next video. Okay, so we look at fixed costs, we look at variable costs, and then we look at mixed costs. So here we consider how cost behaves. Okay, some costs are fixed. They do not change over time within the relevant range. They do not change. They maintain the same no matter the increase in activity levels or output. These costs remain the same over the relevant range. And then we look at variable costs. Variable costs are costs that change with output within the range. And then we look at mixed costs, a cost that is partly fixed and then partly variable. So that is how costs can be classified according to behavior. And then we can also have a gist of control, how cost is classified according to control. And over here, we look at controllable costs. And then non-controllable costs. Okay, so over here we look at controllable costs and non-controllable costs. Controllable costs are costs that the organization has control over. We can decide to limit the extent of the increase or decrease of the cost. But non-controllable costs are usually costs that we do not have control over. And we are going to look at them into detail as we move forward. So this is how we classify costs according to control. And then we can also classify costs according to traceability. Traceability looks at how we can trace costs to their respective cost centers and cost units. And here we look at direct costs and then we look at indirect costs. Okay, so direct costs are costs that can be traceable or easily traceable to a particular cost center or cost unit. And then indirect costs are not easily traceable. You cannot trace them. So these are how we go about cost classification. Like I said earlier, this is just an introduction to costs and then cost accounting. And so I just wanted to have a fair view of cost and how they are classified. In our next video, we are going to go really deep into some of these things. We are going to pick cost behavior and then we talk about it. And then we try to understand variable cost and then this fixed cost. And then look at the calculations that can go in there, even taking into consideration some graphs as well. Remember to subscribe to the channel and then watch out for more videos. Thank you.